Hello, creative, and welcome back to the Empowered Creatives Podcast, finding confidence between hustle and burnout. I'm your host, Victoria Hines, creative career coach, helping creatives just like you navigate those twists and turns in your creative career. Hello, and what's going on in your career right now? I want to ask you a couple questions just so you can kind of take a moment in this podcast to pause and really ask yourself, what's going on? What are some wins you've had as of late? Where are maybe things feeling maybe a little sticky or a little challenging right now? Is there anything that you're looking forward to or maybe something you're dreading in the future? Or is there a lot that's just not working, maybe the way that you thought it would be working by this point in time in your career? Now that you've asked all these questions to yourself, I want you to take a moment and remember, at one point in time, you probably dreamed of being exactly where you're at right now, today. Maybe you feel on top of the world and like you're moving in a really great direction right now, and that is awesome. Keep moving, keep up that consistency, and keep going. But if you're not feeling 100% on the right path, then this is actually going to be the podcast episode for you. It's time to slow down and really analyze what's going on so that you can find the problem and face that big, hairy monster in your career head on. Instead of not being able to even identify what the monster even looks like, in which case you're going to have a really hard time fighting it. Okay, so things aren't cool as a cucumber right now in your career. Something is off, but you're not sure what. Even though it doesn't feel maybe great right now, at one point, this was probably your dream. It is okay to be both ready for change and also cultivate gratitude for how far you have come. And remember, this moment right now, this feeling of confusion and discomfort and exhaustion and maybe failure, this is not you starting over. You are never starting over from scratch in your career, ever. This moment is simply preparing yourself for the next chapter so that you can build the best freaking character arc storyline in the freaking universe. You control your own story. You are the narrator, the author, and it's time to figure out what that next chapter is. So this episode is going to kick off the process into helping you draw out and really figure out what the big, hairy, problem-looking monster is in your career. And yes, I'm going to fully lean into that analogy. I think there's something fun about, imagining the challenges we face as that boogeyman underneath the bed and really getting a good idea of what this monster looks like so that you can fight it, so that you can slay it. Or maybe your tactic will be having a really deep conversation with it to figure out why it's been haunting you so much. All right. So with that being said, I have some really great questions to start asking yourself so you can really start identifying this monster, this challenge that you are facing in your creative career today. Hey there, creative. I have a delightful invitation just for you. Imagine diving even deeper into the incredible world of living your life as an empowered creative, including more tips, tricks, and advice arriving straight into your inbox. Sounds pretty cool, right? Well, guess what? I've got something special brewing, and I don't want you to miss out. Introducing my oh-so-awesome bi-weekly email newsletter. It's a vibrant community bursting with passion, curiosity, and the love of building a creative life. By joining my newsletter, you'll get first access to new promotions and launches, as well as my welcoming voice in your ear every other week. Also, I'll share with you my creative career audit worksheet, a secret tool myself and clients have used during our own career transitions and pivots. So don't miss this opportunity to be my pen pal, as well as deepen your connection with fellow empowered creatives by heading to www.victoriahines.com or following the link in the show notes below. Thank you for being such an incredible listener. And I really look forward to sharing this exciting journey with you through both the podcast and my newsletter. Now, let's dive back into the show. All right. When did you first face this monster or notice something might be stalking you? When did you start feeling that this monster was hanging out in your presence? If I go back to Victoria 3 years ago when I was working in arts administration, so this is going to be circa 2020 for me, I really had known that the monster was around for me for about a year and a half. I wasn't honest with myself maybe about how challenging the monster was, but it had been a year and a half of me just feeling like something was off. Something was there in my career that I didn't really want to be there. My next question is what was the environment you were in when you first faced it? What did the space look like? For me, it was an office, but for you, it may be working with a certain client. It could be a certain space. It could have been an event or a conference. It could have been a moment in time where you remember getting a very, momentous news, maybe a rejection letter, something like that. But what was the environment you were in when you first started noticing this monster was around? My next question for you is who were you with? Are there people you still interact with who trigger this monster to actually show up over and over and over again? For me, I had certain coworkers who triggered it more than others. I've also talked to clients who have really debated if they wanted to step back in projects because as much as they personally loved individuals, they knew that they often struggled to feel their full, thriving creative selves when they worked on certain projects with different individuals. So I want you to identify who are those people and do you still interact with them? My next question is what is the monster keeping you from? Where would you like to be right now in your career, but you feel like you can't quite get there because of it, because of this monster? If I hop back to my job, I know an example for me was I was rolling out some pretty key initiatives and making these really big impacts, but I wasn't being heard. Despite the fact that I had this really great track record of all of these changes that I was making, I would step into these work meetings with my colleagues and just be ignored, not heard, not listened to. And it turned into this very common thread for me. I wanted to be in an environment where I was respected and heard and my voice mattered. And that was just not the place that I was in. So, what is your monster keeping you away from? What would you like to have in your career, but this monster is just holding you back? Next question. How does the monster change you? It's not just the monster showing up and just haunting you. It also is impacting you and your life in some way. So maybe what emotions get triggered inside of you when the monster shows up? Maybe you feel frustrated or exhausted, maybe desperate, angry, maybe disconnected, disinterested, maybe even a little bit of learned helplessness. What are those emotions that are getting triggered inside of you whenever this challenge or this monster shows up? My last question revolves around now that you've kind of gotten a really good idea of who this monster is, why it's there, who triggers it for you, what's the environment. How do you think about tactics to start slaying it? Can you bypass the monster? Is it something you can ignore in your day to day? Or do you need to face it head on? Do you need to start having some strategic, tough conversations with the people that you interact with, work with, maybe even clients to make this monster maybe not so much of a monster anymore? For me, when I think back to that big, hairy monster I was facing, my first tactic was to find allies. I definitely enlisted a lot of help, a lot of allies to help me fight it, to help me sort of sidestep the issues at hand. Um, Sometimes I tried to bypass it, sometimes I tried to numb it or ignore it, which didn't work for very long. Eventually, I had to call a truce and walk away, and that might happen for you too. It just wasn't worth fighting it, what I was giving up in the process. So if you feel like going a little extra mile on this, I definitely recommend kind of really writing down what this monster looks like. I'll drop the questions in the show notes below so that you have those. And if you're feeling a little extra creative, you could even draw this monster out and really visualize what it looks like for you. Here's my one thing for you this week, and this is to go a little bit of a step deeper. I want you to grab my free creative career audit in the show notes below. This worksheet is going to help you walk through additional questions to help you deep dive into what's working versus what needs to be tweaked. It's going to help you identify the problems and hone in on the core issues and common threads. Because the biggest thing to remember is you can't make the changes that you desire if you have not yet identified the problem, aka the big, hairy, scary monster. All right, if you enjoyed this episode, Creative, don't forget to rate, review, and subscribe. And until the next time, stay creative.